The moment the world stopped watching, and she didn't. What happens when the person sworn to protect you becomes the one who hurts you? What happens when a simple request for safety turns into a moment that shatters your trust, your peace, and your sense of humanity? And what happens when the woman standing in the crosshairs refuses to break and instead turns her pain into truth, powerful enough to shake an entire system? This is not just another story. This is a wound America still carries. A wound that opens every time power is abused, every time a voice is silenced, every time a black body is treated as disposable. But this time, the silence didn't win. In a single heartbeat, a police officer's arrogance collided with a woman's courage. He thought she was powerless. He thought no one would believe her. He thought the system would protect him. He had no idea she was a federal agent. He had no idea every word was being recorded. He had no idea the truth was already rising. And this time, it wasn't going to be buried. If you've ever felt the sting of injustice, if you've ever watched someone abuse their authority and wished you could stop it, if you've ever wanted to see what real accountability looks like, then stay with us. You need to hear this story because today we're not just exposing corruption, we're reclaiming dignity, we're demanding truth, we're choosing love over fear and justice over silence. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the Racial Truth channel. Your support helps us shine a light where others won't. Your voice helps us lift stories that deserve to be heard. Your presence helps build a stronger, kinder, more courageous America. So take a breath, prepare your heart, because once you hear what happened next, you will never look at power, justice, or silence the same way again. Let's begin. Freedom Square. The late afternoon sun hung low over Freedom Square, painting the old brick buildings of Briarwood, Georgia, in molten shades of gold. The kind of heat that presses against your skin, making the air shimmer like the world is holding its breath. The kind of day where tempers rise as fast as the temperature, and history feels close enough to touch. For Maya Johnson, this place carried a weight deeper than the humidity. Her grandmother used to bring her here as a child, pointing out the plaques honoring those who had marched through these streets when doing so meant risking more than arrest. "Baby, they beat us here," her grandmother would whisper, her voice soft but unwavering. But we kept walking anyway. Now at 34, Maya walked those same paths with a tote bag slung over her shoulder, filled with peaches, cornbread, and a jar of handmade blackberry jam from the farmer's market. She allowed herself, at least on the surface, to pretend this was a normal day off, a day to breathe, a day to exist not as Special Agent Johnson of the FBI, but as a black woman in the South enjoying the summer sunlight. But the truth was that Maya never fully relaxed. You don't get that luxury after years in Army intelligence, and even less after joining the FBI's counterterrorism division. Hyper-awareness becomes muscle memory. Even now, moving through a crowd of families, buskers tuning guitars, and teenagers with snow cones, her eyes scanned the environment with instinctive precision. She wasn't paranoid. She was prepared. And that instinct, the one that had saved her life more times than she cared to recount, was what made her notice it. At first glance, it was nothing more than a 500-gallon propane tank, cordoned off with yellow tape near the setup for the weekend's music festival. But for someone trained like Maya, it was impossible to ignore. A tank that size could turn Freedom Square into a fireball if mishandled, and someone was mishandling it. Just a few feet away, leaning against a lamppost with the kind of careless posture that advertises boredom and entitlement, stood Officer Brad Keller. Late 30s, white, thick around the middle, an officer whose uniform compressed his belly rather than hid it. His sunglasses reflected the square but revealed nothing of his eyes. In one hand, he held a lit cigarette, smoke curling upward in thin, lazy ribbons. A lit cigarette, within dangerous proximity of a propane tank. It was the kind of negligence that made Maya's pulse tighten. This wasn't a minor oversight, it was a potentially deadly mistake. But what stung more was the familiarity of the posture, the attitude. A white police officer in the American South, exuding an air that said, "I answer to no one." She'd seen men like him too many times. Men whose authority fed their arrogance. Men who never imagined someone would challenge them, especially a black woman. Maya adjusted the strap of her tote bag and changed her course. She could have walked away. She could have told herself this wasn't her problem. But her grandmother's voice lived inside her, echoing through decades. Freedom ain't free. Somebody's gotta stand for it. And if there was one thing Maya refused to do anymore, it was shrink. Her steps were slow, deliberate, respectful. She kept her palms visible, her voice ready to be soft but steady. Every black woman in America knows how to approach a man with a badge, how to walk the razor-thin line between assertive and aggressive, between safety and danger. She stopped a few feet from him. "Excuse me, officer," she said, her tone warm but controlled. Keller didn't move at first. He took another drag, blowing smoke sideways, letting it drift lazily into the thick heat. Only then did he turn his head, slowly, like acknowledging her was an inconvenience he wanted to savor. His eyes traveled down her body, not with desire but with irritation. Like she was a gnat, he hadn't decided whether to swat. "What?" he finally grunted. "You need something?" Maya kept her hands loose at her sides, her expression open. "I don't mean to bother you," she said, "but you're smoking really close to that propane tank. It's dangerous. Could you please put the cigarette out? Just to keep everyone safe." There. Clear. Polite. Firm but respectful. Worded exactly the way her training and her life experience had designed. Keller lifted an eyebrow, then let his gaze flick dismissively toward the tank and back to her. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked. "Safety patrol?" He chuckled, a humorless, grating sound. "Let me guess. One of those folks who looks for something to complain about every time they step outside." Maya kept her breathing steady. "I'm just a concerned citizen," she said, "and that tank is a hazard." He smirked, flicking a trail of ash onto the pavement near her shoes. "I know how to do my job, lady." He tapped his badge. "See this? Means I'm the law here. You're just another person with too much time on their hands." There it was, the layered dismissal of her gender, her race, her humanity. A tone she'd heard in classrooms growing up, in boardrooms she worked twice as hard to enter, in airports where she still got randomly selected. It was a tone that told her she was trespassing in a space he believed he owned. She swallowed the flare of heat in her chest. "Your job is to protect people," she said quietly. "Right now, that cigarette is putting everyone in this square at risk." He stepped closer. A small violation of space, but an intentional one. The threat wasn't in the movement alone. It was in the message. "I can come this close. You can't." "You trying to tell me how to do my job?" he said with a smirk. "That's cute." A few passers-by slowed, curious, but no one pulled out a phone. No one intervened. Because when a uniform confronts a civilian, strangers instinctively step back rather than step in. Maya felt a flicker of loneliness, the same kind her grandmother had described, standing on courthouse steps decades ago, facing deputies who spat insults while townsfolk pretended not to see. The loneliness of being right, but alone. Still, Maya didn't back down. She'd fought armed insurgents overseas. She'd interrogated men who would rather die than talk. She wasn't going to let a small-town bully rewrite her destiny. "I'm asking respectfully," she said, her voice a degree cooler, "that you extinguish the cigarette." That was the moment Keller's expression shifted. The way he heard the word respectfully was not how she meant it. To him, it was a challenge. A reminder that respect was something he had not earned, and that truth stung his ego like a slap. His jaw hardened. He straightened, stepping into her space again, so close she could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "You're not asking," he growled. "You're telling, and nobody tells me what to do." His finger jabbed her shoulder, sharp, unnecessary, meant to provoke. She didn't flinch, not physically, but inside something cold began to coil. This was becoming an incident, and she understood with painful clarity that this interaction had crossed from negligence into hostility, from arrogance into an unspoken threat. This was no longer about safety. This was about dominance. This was about a white officer who saw a black woman standing tall and couldn't tolerate it. The ask. The moment Officer Brad Keller jabbed his finger into Maya Johnson's shoulder, Something inside her shifted, not in fear, but in recognition. She had met this kind of man in so many forms. At playgrounds where little black girls were told to wait their turn, in high school hallways where authority punished her confidence as attitude, in combat zones overseas where arrogance, not strategy, endangered lives. His uniform didn't surprise her. His posture didn't surprise her. His need to assert dominance over a stranger, least of all a black woman, was painfully familiar. But familiarity did not make the sting any softer. Around them, the square buzzed with ordinary life. A group of teenagers laughed loudly near the fountain. A mother pushed a stroller along the brick walkway. A pair of retirees shared a bench under the shade of an ancient oak tree. And yet, in this lively space, Maya felt the unmistakable tightening of distance, the invisible ripple that happens when people sense conflict but choose safety over intervention. No one recorded, no one approached. No one said, "Sir, she's right, please put it out." People had learned the hard way that stepping between a civilian and a police officer, especially in the South, especially when the civilian is black, could end disastrously. So Maya stood alone. Keller saw that loneliness. He fed on it. His smirk widened. "You know, you're lucky I'm in a good mood," he said, his voice curling with smugness. "Another cop might have written you up already. Disorderly conduct, interference, something like that." He said it like he was offering a kindness, like his threats were acts of mercy. Maya breathed in slowly, tasting both smoke and summer heat. She kept her voice measured, refusing to let anger spill into her tone. "I'm not here to interfere," she replied softly. "I'm asking you to stop smoking next to that propane tank because it's dangerous. For everyone." "Yeah, lady," Keller scoffed, flicking ash onto the ground again. "I've been on this force longer than you've probably had a driver's license. If that tank was dangerous, I'd know." His tone made something inside her ache. Not because of the insult. She was well past caring what small men thought of her, but because of the recklessness. Because he didn't care about the risk. Because he didn't care about the people in the square, or the families nearby, or the festival crew working just out of sight. He didn't care because he assumed there would be no consequences. Not for him. Her grandmother's words floated back like a ghost carried on the breeze. "Some folks mistake their power for permission, baby." Keller pressed forward again, the toe of his boot nearly touching hers. The air around him shifted, no longer bored but bristling with the thrill of confrontation. "You got a name?" he demanded. Maya's face didn't move. "Why do you ask?" His grin turned feral. "So I know what to write in the report when you get yourself in trouble? Don't worry, I'll make it believable." There it was, the weaponization of paperwork, the threat that had cowed countless people into silence. He might not even know her name, but he knew the system favored his word. He knew the assumption of guilt would fall, as it always had, onto people who looked like her. "I'm not here to make trouble," Maya said, though her voice was firmer now. "I'm here because you're putting people at risk." "People?" Keller repeated as the word itself offended him. "No one here cares. You're the only one making noise. So if you want to help yourself by walking away." The laugh that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't even deep. But it was sharp, derisive, the sound of a man who had been allowed to bully for so long that cruelty felt normal, felt justified. Maya's heartbeat stayed steady. Years of training had taught her how to hold her center, even as the world shifted. She steadied her breath, adjusted her weight subtly, keeping her posture non-threatening but strong. "I'm giving you a chance," she said quietly, "to do the right thing." Her voice wasn't antagonistic. It wasn't mocking. It was simply true. And truth can provoke those who fear it. Keller's nostrils flared. "A chance," he repeated, incredulous. "Who the hell do you think you are?" But before she could answer, he leaned in even closer. So close his breath touched her skin. So close she could see the dark sheen of sweat at his hairline. "You act tough now," he said, "but nobody's going to take your side. Not here, not against me." His words carried a deeper message, one that echoed through time, one that had been whispered and shouted and weaponized against black women for generations. "Be quiet. Be small. Don't challenge us. No one will believe you anyway." She felt the old, familiar ache of injustice rise in her chest. Not personal hurt, Something older, something generational, a grief inherited from women who had been struck, silenced, dismissed, and doubted long before body cameras existed, long before smartphones recorded the truth, long before America claimed it had changed. But she also felt something else. Resolve. Not the fiery, reckless kind. The cold, crystal-clear kind that forms under pressure. The kind that grows in women who have endured enough to recognize when a moment is bigger than themselves. This wasn't just about a cigarette. It wasn't just about a propane tank. It wasn't even just about the punch she sensed was coming. This was about how systems protect the powerful and abandon the vulnerable. How lies bury truth unless someone is brave enough to bring it to light. How fear spreads when good people stay silent. How justice only happens when someone decides they have had enough. She knew walking away would be safer, easier, expected. But she also knew this. Silence never protected her ancestors. Compliance never saved her people. Fear never once made America better, so she stood her ground. "Officer Keller," she said softly, "I'm asking one last time. Please extinguish the cigarette." Her voice held no tremor, no apology, no shame. It was the voice of a woman who had learned to stand tall in rooms designed to shrink her. A woman who had worn the uniform of her nation, who had saluted the flag not because she believed America was perfect, but because she believed it could be better. But Keller heard none of that. What he heard, what his pride interpreted, was challenge, defiance, insolence. His upper lip curled into a snarl. "You really don't know your place, do you?" The words dug deep, not because she believed them, but because she knew how many people he had said them to. How many people had swallowed their anger because a badge outweighed their voice? How many lives had been quietly smothered under the phrase, "know your place"? He tilted his head, cracking his knuckles with slow, deliberate menace. "You keep pushing," he said, a thin thread of rage winding through his voice, "and you're going to regret it." For a moment, time seemed to slow around them. The square dimmed. The sounds of children and vendors softened into background noise. Maya felt the world narrow to this single confrontation, a confrontation she had not sought, but one she would not run from. Inside her blouse, beneath the third button, the Kestrel 7 recorder captured every word, every breath, every threat, every insult. She felt the shape of the tiny lens against her skin, a quiet reminder that truth was gathering strength, even if the world around her remained blind. And as Keller stepped even closer, his shadow swallowing hers, Maya understood with chilling clarity. This moment was spiraling. This officer had no intention of diffusing anything. He was escalating, testing, pushing toward brutality with the casual entitlement of a man who had never been held accountable. And she knew, deeply, sharply, that what came next would hurt. But she also knew it would matter, because some stories only change the world when someone refuses to back down. His word against hers. For a moment, the world in Freedom Square seemed to tilt. Maya could feel it, the way conversations quieted, the way bodies angled away, the way the very air thickened with the unspoken knowledge of what might happen next. A confrontation between a white police officer and a black woman had gravity. History had taught everyone that. And Officer Brad Keller felt that gravity too. But instead of stepping back, he leaned into it. The sneer on his face sharpened as he took another deliberate step into her space, their shadows merging on the hot brick ground. His voice dropped to a low, gravelly growl meant for her alone. "You really think you can stand there and talk to me like that?" he said. "Like you matter? Like you have a say in anything happening here?" His words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried the weight of generations, of every moment in American history where black voices were silenced, dismissed, written over. And it wasn't lost on Maya, not for a second. Her heartbeat stayed steady. Years of military and federal training had built a fortress inside her, one brick of discipline stacked atop another. Still, she felt the sting, not because his insult cut deeply, but because it reflected a truth she wished were gone from this world. Too many people still believed what he just said aloud. She kept her gaze fixed on his, unwavering. "I'm asking you to do your job safely," she replied quietly. "That isn't disrespect. It's responsibility." Her restraint only aggravated him. You want to talk responsibility? How about your responsibility to follow orders when an officer tells you to step back? His voice rose slightly, just enough for a few bystanders to glance over. Or is that too complicated for you? He dragged out the last words, injecting them with a poisonous mix of condescension and barely veiled racial implication. A muscle in Maya's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Keller grinned. He saw the tiny reaction, the slight tightening of resolve, and misread it as fear. Misread her as someone who could be intimidated into silence. He loved that idea, loved the power of it. Here's how this worked, he said, crossing his arms in a gesture meant to display authority. I'm the voice that gets heard. I'm the one writing the report. And trust me, sweetheart, if you give me any more trouble, that report won't be pretty. She inhaled slowly, his word against hers. The phrase pulsed through her mind with bitter familiarity. She had seen this dynamic play out too many times. At traffic stops, in public parks, on sidewalks, in courtrooms, in news stories that broke her heart. Too often, the badge became a shield not for justice, but for lies. Keller leaned in again. I'll say you were aggressive, that you threatened me. Maybe you were drunk. Hell, maybe you tried to grab me. Who's going to prove otherwise? He looked around at the square, families, teens, vendors, all of whom suddenly became witnesses to their own inaction. No phones out, no cameras pointed. See, he said, gesturing to the bystanders who had turned away. Nobody's watching, nobody's filming. They don't care about you, but they respect me. He lowered his voice to a whisper sharp enough to cut. And when it comes down to it, they'll believe me. For the first time since approaching Keller, Maya felt a true pang of fear. Not for her safety, but for the familiar cruelty of this pattern. His word against hers, a phrase that had destroyed countless lives. But Maya wasn't alone. Not this time. Beneath the cotton fabric of her blouse, the third button rested just above her sternum, small and unassuming. The Kestrel 7 micro recorder. Always recording, always buffering, always capturing truth. A truth men like Keller never expected to face. As he spoke, she shifted her tote bag just slightly, letting her arm graze the button. The motion was imperceptible to anyone watching, but the meaning was profound. A soft vibration signaled that the last 5 minutes had been saved permanently. Every insult, every threat, every lie he promised to tell, all preserved. The weight of that knowledge steadied her. But Keller mistook her calm for submission. It thrilled him. You know, he continued, warming now to his performance, you should have just walked away when I told you to. Would have kept things simple. He cracked his knuckles, slow and deliberate. But it's like you people never learn. The words were out of his mouth before he even realized the racial slur embedded beneath the surface. The kind of phrase officers were trained not to say aloud anymore. But he said it, and Maya felt the entire shape of the moment crystallize. The tension in the square shifted again, this time darker, hotter, sharper. Keller's ego was no longer satisfied with asserting power verbally. He needed something more tangible, something he could feel. His posture changed, shoulders squared, feet planted. A cruel glint sharpened behind the reflective glass of his sunglasses. Maya recognized it instantly. He was preparing to strike. Her training kicked in. She could block the blow, pivot on her heel, sweep his legs out from under him, handcuff him before he even hit the ground. She could defend herself 100 different ways, but she didn't move. She stood still, letting him commit. Because she understood something he didn't. This moment wasn't just about her. It wasn't even about him. It was about the countless people who had been harmed by men like him and then silenced by a system designed to protect the uniform, not the truth. She needed undeniable evidence. She needed the world to see what happened when arrogance and power collided with prejudice and impunity. She needed to expose the system, not just the man. Keller took another step closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. You keep running your mouth, and I promise you, I'll teach you a lesson you'll never forget. He lifted his hand slightly, testing her reaction. She didn't give him one. Her stillness infuriated him. Oh, you think you're tough, he snarled. You think you're smart? Let's see how smart you are after this. Then it happened. The shift of weight. The tightening of his jaw, the sudden swing of his arm. Everything slowed. His fist drew back, knuckles whitening as they curled into a tight, brutal weapon. His shoulder rolled, his torso rotated. The blow came in a direct, unhesitating arc toward her face. A punch, not a slap, not a shove. A full-force, closed-fist punch from a trained officer. And Maya let it land. Pain exploded across her cheek, a bright, blinding white that fractured into jagged shards. Her head snapped to the side with a sickening crack. She felt her lip tear open, the warm rush of blood filling her mouth with the metallic taste of iron and humiliation. Her sunglasses flew off, skittering across the pavement until they hit the base of the propane tank. Her tote bag dropped from her hand, peaches tumbling across the bricks like spilled marbles, rolling between strangers' feet. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself before she fell. For a moment, just a heartbeat, the world was a blur of pain and ringing silence. Then Keller's voice cut through, loud, triumphant. Ugly. That's what you get, he barked. Now get out of my sight before I arrest you for assaulting an officer. The irony, the cruelty of it, twisted something deep in her chest. He had struck her, yet he wielded the threat of a false accusation as easily as he wielded his fist. It wasn't just violence. It was erasure. It was rewriting the truth in real time. It was centuries of lived experience condensed into one moment. She lifted her head slowly, tasting blood, her vision adjusting, breath steadying. Keller expected fear, expected tears, expected her to break. Instead, her eyes hardened, cold and sharp as steel. She wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. The gesture was calm, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She had him. She knew it. But he didn't. Not yet. Behind her bruised cheek and split lip, something fierce ignited. A resolve bigger than anger, bigger than pain. A commitment to justice, to truth, to every black woman who had ever been told she wouldn't be believed. The blow she chooses to take. For several seconds after Officer Brad Keller's fist collided with her face, the world around Maya Johnson dissolved into raw sensation. Soundless, colorless, timeless. Just pain. A hot electric burst that ripped through her jaw and set her ears ringing. The force of the punch sent a shockwave down her spine, rattling her teeth, blurring her vision. Her sunglasses flew off, spinning end over end until they cracked against the pavement. The peaches she'd bought moments earlier, a simple pleasure, a symbol of a peaceful day, rolled out from her tote bag and scattered across the square. Their soft skins bruised instantly against the ground, a quiet metaphor for how quickly a calm afternoon had turned violent. People saw it, people heard it, but no one stepped forward. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, the kind of silence born not of apathy, but of fear. Fear of the badge, fear of retaliation, fear of becoming the next target. A silence too familiar in too many American cities. Maya steadied herself before her knees buckled. She reached a trembling hand toward the ground but didn't fall. She refused to fall, not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't give this man the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Not even for a second. Blood dripped from the corner of her lip, warm and metallic. It slid down her chin and onto her blouse. She tasted iron. She tasted humiliation. She tasted history. Her grandmother used to say, "Sometimes our bodies remember wounds we never lived through." And in that moment, Maya felt the weight of generations pressing into her bones. Women who were struck, silenced, threatened, then told the world would never believe them. Keller, towering over her, mistook the pain on her face for fear. He mistook her silence for submission. He mistook her dignity for defeat, which made his next words even more poisonous. "How's that for smart, huh?" he taunted, flexing the hand he just used to strike her. "Now get the hell out of my sight before I arrest you for assaulting a police officer." Assaulting a police officer. The twisted cruelty of the lie burned as badly as the wound on her face. He enjoyed this. She saw it, felt it. He loved the power, the impunity. Loved the idea that his word would bury hers. Loved the idea that a black woman in simple clothes, invisible to him moments before, now stood alone with no witnesses willing to stand for her. He genuinely believed the world belonged to him. but he had no idea what she carried. Maya lifted her head, slowly, deliberately, with the controlled precision of a soldier, a survivor, a woman who had fought too many battles, internal and external, to let a bully dictate her fate. Her vision steadied enough to bring Keller's face into focus, red with adrenaline, smeared with arrogance. His chest rose and fell rapidly, not from exertion but excitement. He believed he had won. He believed she was nothing more than another woman he could intimidate into silence. A woman whose pain didn't matter, whose voice didn't matter, whose truth didn't matter. But Maya's eyes, still sharp, still cold, made something flicker behind his sunglasses. Confusion, unease, a microsecond of doubt, because she wasn't reacting the way he expected. She wasn't crying, she wasn't begging, she wasn't running. She simply looked at him, looked through him, and in that gaze Keller sensed, without yet understanding, that something was wrong. Something in the balance of power he thought he controlled was beginning to shift. Maya raised the back of her hand and wiped the blood from her lip, leaving a faint crimson streak across her skin. It was a small gesture, but it hardened everything inside her. It crystallized the moment into clarity. This wasn't just an assault, this was evidence, and she had every second recorded. The Kestrel 7 button camera, the unassuming pearl-colored button on her blouse, had captured the entire interaction in high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. It had saved the last 5 minutes automatically when she touched it earlier. It had captured the threats, the insults, the escalation, and now the violence. She had him, but Keller didn't know that. Not yet. His ignorance was almost grotesque in its confidence. He took another step forward, looming over her again. "What's wrong?" he sneered. "Lost your tongue? Need another lesson?" He said it loudly enough that a few people turned their heads, just long enough to register the situation before deciding not to get involved. Their eyes flickered away guiltily, as if contact alone might implicate them or draw the officer's wrath. Maya didn't blame them. She understood fear, understood the instinct for self-preservation, understood why so many people stayed silent when they should have spoken. It's easy to judge from far away, but much harder when danger breathes down your neck. Still, the silence stung. It always did. It always had. She inhaled through her nose, grounding herself. The pain in her face pulsed like a heartbeat, but she welcomed it. Pain was information. Pain was clarity. Pain was proof. "Officer Keller," she said slowly, each word careful, crisp, controlled. Her voice was soft, but it carried. It carried through her own trembling, through the thick heat, through the silence of the crowd. It carried because it was constructed from something deeper than fear. It was constructed for a purpose. Keller blinked. The calm in her tone unnerved him. Maya bent down, not to retrieve her peaches, not yet, but to pick up her sunglasses from the hot pavement. One lens was cracked, fracturing her reflection into jagged shards. She held them for a moment, considering the damage. Something about that broken lens felt symbolic. A reminder that truth, once shattered, can be pieced back together. But only if someone fights to gather the shards. Keller watched her with growing confusion. She wasn't behaving like the women he usually intimidated. She wasn't pleading or shrinking or scrambling to escape. She was regrouping, in total silence. That silence maddened him. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "I told you to get out of here." Maya straightened slowly, the broken sunglasses dangling from her fingers. Then with a fluid, unhurried motion, one shaped by years of training, she reached behind her, into the back of her jeans. Keller tensed, misreading the motion entirely. To him, this was the moment he could escalate further. Was she going for a weapon, a phone, a last-minute plea for help? He didn't know, but whatever he imagined, he was ready to crush it. He wasn't ready for what actually came out. A worn leather wallet, simple, folded over, but embossed with a golden emblem that had stopped bigger men than him in their tracks. She flipped it open. The sun hit the metal. Keller's breath hitched. The badge glinted, a heavy gold shield etched with an eagle and scales of justice. Below it, a clean, crisp FBI identification card. Her picture, her name, her title. Special Agent Maya Johnson, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Counterterrorism Division. Time stopped again, not because of pain, but because of the truth. Keller's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His voice suddenly thin, stumbled out. No, no way, you're lying. But he knew she wasn't. The badge was too real. The presence is too steady. The authority is too natural. And in that moment, he understood in one brutal, life-altering flash. He had just assaulted a federal officer, on camera, without provocation, in front of witnesses, and with a history of complaints trailing behind him like a shadow. The implications crashed over him like a tsunami. This is a misunderstanding, he sputtered. It's the heat. I wasn't thinking. I didn't know. Maya said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was more powerful than any accusation. It forced him to sit in the truth of what he had done. It forced him to confront the wreckage of his own choices. And for the first time since she approached him, Keller looked genuinely afraid. The kind of fear born not from danger, but from accountability. He staggered back half a step, as if trying to distance himself from the consequences already tightening around him. Then desperation took over, sharp and frantic. He grabbed his radio, then his personal phone. His hands shook. "Miller, it's Keller," he whispered harshly into the transmitter. "I've got a situation, a real problem down at Freedom Square." Maya watched him dig the hole deeper. He had no idea that every word, every breath, every stuttered confession was being recorded by the silent witness sitting against her chest. He had no clue the trap was already shut. And for the first time all afternoon, Maya felt something close to relief. Not because she wanted revenge, not because she wanted him to suffer, but because truth, real, undeniable truth, was no longer in his control. He could lie, he could panic, he could beg, but he could not erase what he had done. The badge he didn't see. For the first time since he struck her, Officer Brad Keller looked shaken, not because he feared for Maya's well-being, but because the badge she held in her hand had shattered the arrogance he'd been hiding behind like armor. The golden shield gleamed in the sun, almost painfully bright, as if reflecting back every terrible decision he'd made in the last 10 minutes. The engraved eagle seemed to stare him down. The black and white photo of Special Agent Maya Johnson, FBI, was a mirror he hadn't prepared to face. FBI? Keller stammered, voice cracking in a register that betrayed the panic clawing through him. No, no, no. You're lying. That can't be real. He said it without conviction, because he knew. Deep down he knew. The badge wasn't a prop. The ID wasn't a fake. Her voice wasn't trembling. Her body posture wasn't frightened. She was calm, too calm for a victim, too still for someone who had just endured an assault, too composed for anyone except a trained federal agent, which was exactly what she was. Maya held his gaze with a cold, quiet steadiness, the type that came from years spent facing men far more dangerous than him. Keller could feel something shifting inside himself, something cracking. The power he'd been swimming in moments earlier now drained from him, leaving behind a hollow, trembling shell. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I didn't know," he whispered, as if not knowing somehow absolved him. Maya didn't respond. Her silence was sharper than any words. It carved straight through the thin oxygen he was still trying to cling to. She watched him, not with vengeance, not with cruelty, but with a sober, righteous clarity. The clarity of someone who had endured harm and refused to be erased by it. Someone who knew the law better than her abuser ever had. Someone who finally had the chance to hold accountable a system that too often failed people who looked like her. Keller's fear escalated quickly into frantic desperation. "I swear, I didn't mean—" "Look, Agent Johnson," he said, his hands half raised as though warding off a blow. "It's hot today. I'm stressed. You startled me. I shouldn't have reacted like that." He laughed then, a short, manic, brittle sound that died just as quickly as it escaped. He was spiraling, grasping at excuses like lifelines, each one thinner than the last. "You know, misunderstandings happen," he continued, voice trembling. "We can talk this out. I mean, no harm, no foul, right?" Maya remained silent. Her lips still bled, Her face still throbbed. Her sunglasses still lay broken in her hand. This was no harm. This was no foul. This was violence. And he was scrambling to survive the consequences. Keller's breathing grew shallow. Sweat trickled down from beneath his sunglasses, cutting thin, glossy trails down his temples. He looked around wildly now, as though hoping the crowd would support him, as though hoping the silence of bystanders could still protect him the way it always had. But he was alone. Maya stepped forward, not aggressively, but with the controlled certainty of someone stepping fully into their power. Holding the badge in one hand and the broken sunglasses in the other, she stood tall, despite the bruise blooming across her cheekbone. Federal Bureau of Investigation, she repeated, her tone even, steady. Special Agent, Counterterrorism Division. Each word landed with precise weight. Each word stripped more of his confidence. Each word forced him to confront the truth. He hadn't struck some woman. He had assaulted a federal officer, on tape, without provocation, and now his career and his freedom hung in the balance. Keller stumbled backward until he hit the lamppost behind him. His hands shot out automatically, gripping the metal as if it could anchor him. His voice, once loud and commanding, shrank to a trembling croak. No, this is a setup, he whispered weakly. You tricked me. You wanted this to happen. Maya blinked once, slowly. I wanted you not to smoke next to a propane tank. He flinched at the simplicity of the truth. It was insulting to him. How small the original request had been. How preventable this entire moment was. How much of his downfall had been his own making. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, searching for footing. I need to call my supervisor, he said finally, grabbing his radio with shaking fingers. Sarge'll know what to do. Of course, he would call for backup, not to protect the public, not to confess, but to hide behind the same system that had insulated him for years. Officer Keller was not the first man to crumble under accountability. He was simply one who never expected to face it. He pressed the radio button, but his voice cracked. Dispatch, he began. I need a landline to Sergeant Doyle. Urgent. Maya didn't stop him. She didn't need to. Every stutter, every plea, every panicked breath was being recorded by the miniature lens hidden in her blouse, the little device he'd mocked without knowing it existed. She watched him fumble with the number, watched his sweating hands struggle to grip his phone. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable now. Animalistic, desperate, raw. A sinking sensation washed over him, like being dragged underwater. He pressed his phone to his ear. Miller, it's Keller, he whispered urgently. I've got a situation. A real problem down at Freedom Square. His voice dropped even lower, frantic. It's a woman. She's claiming she's FBI. Says I assaulted her. A pause, a muffled voice on the other end. Then Keller's face drained of color. She's got a badge, he said quickly. Looks real. I need you here. Now, please. He hung up, almost dropping his phone in the process. He dragged a sleeve across his forehead, as though trying to wipe away the consequences. His breathing was fast and shallow. Maya could see the moment his panic began mutating into something uglier. Anger fueled by humiliation. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled into a fist again, though he didn't swing this time. He was too unsteady. My supervisor's on his way, he said, as though this was a threat, as though reinforcements could somehow reverse the truth. Maya finally spoke. Good. Keller blinked, thrown off. Good? He repeated weakly. Yes, she said. He will be a witness to your arrest. The words hit him harder than any punch she could have delivered. Keller stumbled backward again, spine pressing into the lamppost. Arrest? He whispered. You can't arrest me. The fear in his voice was something Maya had heard in suspects before. People who were used to power suddenly stripped of it. But she also recognized something else hiding beneath it. Entitlement. A belief that consequences were for other people. A belief that the badge protected him from accountability. She watched him flail, watched him become a frightened, cornered creature, desperately seeking an escape that no longer existed. And for a brief moment, just a flicker, she felt pity for him, not because he deserved it, but because she understood the terror of being confronted by your own truth. Officer Keller, she said, her voice level but not cruel, you assaulted a federal officer in the performance of her duties. You made verbal threats, you attempted intimidation, and you tried to lie about it. Those are federal crimes. His knees seemed to weaken. No, no, this can't. I didn't mean. His words tangled into each other. Maya held up a hand, not to silence him, but to assert control of the space. Stop, she said. He froze. Your supervisor will be here shortly, she continued. You will have an opportunity to explain your actions to him. But understand this, nothing you say now can undo what you've already done. For a moment, Keller stared at her, really stared at her. The reality of who she was, of what she represented, of the truth she held in her hands, began sinking past the layers of ego and entitlement. And for the first time, he seemed to see her not as an obstacle, not as a target, not as a stereotype, but as a person with dignity, a person with authority, a person whose pain had consequences. He looked away quickly, ashamed. The square was no longer just a public space. It had become a courtroom, a reckoning, a collision of truth and arrogance. And Maya stood at its center, not as a victim, but as a force. As she waited for Sergeant Doyle to arrive, a soft breeze lifted the hem of her blouse, brushing against the still warm Kestrel 7 recorder. A device so small, so subtle, yet powerful enough to dismantle a decades-old web of lies, misconduct, and immunity. She didn't relish what was coming. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt something quieter, something steadier. Purpose. Justice wasn't a victory to her, it was a responsibility. And today in Freedom Square, that responsibility was unfolding one truth at a time. The blue wall. 10 minutes passed before the police cruiser arrived. Though for Maya the minutes felt stretched, long threads of silence punctuated only by the faint ringing still echoing in her ears from the punch. She stood rooted to the same patch of brick, the golden FBI badge still out, her breath steady despite the throbbing in her face. Officer Brad Keller hovered several feet away, pacing in small, frantic circles like a man waiting for a verdict he already suspected would not be favorable. Each minute brought more sweat beating at his temples, more trembling in his hands. Every now and then, he'd mutter under his breath, half apologies, half attempts to rewrite reality before his supervisor arrived. But reality did not bend for him now. It bent toward truth, and truth was walking straight toward him in the form of Sergeant Frank Doyle. The cruiser rolled quietly to a stop. The fact that Doyle didn't use lights or sirens was deliberate. He wanted this low profile, contained, manageable. His job for years had been to make messes disappear. He expected today to be no different. Doyle stepped out with the controlled, economical movements of a seasoned officer. Late 50s, salt and pepper hair cut tight against his scalp. Jawline firm but exhausted. His uniform was crisp, badge polished, boots gleaming. Everything about him underscored authority, but not the noble kind, the practical kind, the political kind, the kind that knew which complaints to bury and which officers to protect. His eyes surveyed the scene in a single sweep. Keller, with sweat-slicked panic painted across his face. Maya, with blood drying on her lip and a half-cracked pair of sunglasses dangling from her fingers. The scattered peaches, the propane tank, the tense, watchful bystanders. A picture was forming in his mind, but only the outline. He intended to color it in himself. Officer Keller, Doyle called out, his voice calm but edged with annoyance. What's going on here? He didn't look at Maya when he spoke. Not yet, because acknowledging her too soon, acknowledging the injured black woman standing tall and holding a federal badge, would mean confronting the possibility that Keller was wrong. And Doyle's instinct was to protect the uniform, not the truth. Keller all but rushed toward him. Sarge, thank God you're here. This woman, she was causing a disturbance, getting aggressive. I tried to de-escalate, but she just kept pushing and pushing. It got heated. But she's making claims now. Crazy claims. He gestured vaguely toward Maya, the words tumbling over each other. Doyle raised a hand to quiet him, then turned, but not fully, to Maya. "Ma'am," he said, with the patronizing politeness of a man who thinks he already knows the ending of a story, "I'm Sergeant Doyle. I supervise this district. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding." The word hung between them like a stale scent. Misunderstanding. The word used to gaslight victims. The word used to excuse misconduct. The word used to smooth over the truth. Doyle used it like a shield, but Maya had seen shields before. She had learned how to break past them. She raised her badge again, slowly, calmly, not to boast, not to intimidate, but to clarify the truth. "Special Agent Maya Johnson," she said, "Federal Bureau of Investigation. And there is no misunderstanding." Doyle's eyes narrowed, flicking toward the badge but not quite accepting it. "FBI," he repeated, skepticism dripping from the letters. "You're far from Quantico, Agent. What business does the Bureau have with a minor disagreement in Freedom Square?" Maya didn't flinch. "My jurisdiction," she said evenly, "is anywhere federal law is violated." The quiet firmness in her voice pressed against him, but Doyle tried to poke holes anyway. "Look," he sighed, shifting into his practiced tone of weary authority, "I'm sure you know how these things can be blown out of proportion. Officer Keller is a good cop. Overworked, maybe a little stressed, but good. If everyone here just takes a breath, we can find a solution that doesn't involve unnecessary paperwork." Paperwork, a word he wielded like a threat, like the burden of justice was hers to feel guilty about. He wasn't trying to understand. He was trying to manage, to minimize, to manipulate, because that was his job, and Keller's, and the system's, to shrink victims until they fit neatly inside silence. Maya blinked once, slowly. "Your officer," she said, "was smoking next to a 500-gallon propane tank. When I asked him to stop, he became verbally abusive, threatened me, and then physically assaulted me." The word assaulted hit Keller like a slap. He flinched. Doyle's expression hardened, not with outrage at the violence, but with irritation at the complications. "Agent Johnson," he said carefully, "you have a split lip and a story. That's hardly—" "Hardly what, Sergeant?" she interrupted softly. "Hardly enough to hold him accountable?" He froze. Her tone wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was simply true. And truth unnerved him more than any shouting ever could. Doyle shifted his weight, lowering his voice. "Look, you're making this into something bigger than it needs to be. Keller apologizes, you accept, and we go our separate ways. No need to ruin a man's career over a misunderstanding." There it was again, that poisoned word. Maya's eyes sharpened. She saw it now clearly. Keller was the fist. Doyle was the shield. One inflicted the wound, the other covered it. Together they formed the system she had sworn to challenge whenever it trampled the rights of the people it claimed to serve. "Sergeant Doyle," she said, her voice dropping to a low, icy calm that made Keller visibly stiffen, "what your officer did is a federal crime, and what you are attempting to do now, discredit a federal agent, minimize the violence, and negotiate silence, sounds a great deal like obstruction of justice." Doyle's jaw flexed, a crack in his mask. Keller looked between them, panic sharpening in his eyes. He had expected Doyle to save him. Now he wasn't so sure. Doyle regained his composure with visible effort. "Agent Johnson, you can't prove anything. It's two officers against one civilian." "Civilian," he said it deliberately, ignoring the badge she held, trying to reduce her again, trying to strip her of authority, trying to drag her back into the familiar dynamic where the badge outweighed the truth. He didn't know that the truth was already sealed. Maya exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing the third button on her blouse, the tiny, unassuming pearl that hid the heart of the entire story. The Kestrel 7 recorder. 4K video, directional microphone, 5-minute buffer, capturing every moment Keller thought he controlled. She lifted the button into view, letting it hang from its thin black wire like a courtroom exhibit. Keller's face went white. Doyle's eyes widened. "This," she said calmly, "has been recording the entire interaction." Keller made a sound like a strangled gasp. Doyle looked as if someone had kicked the air out of him. It captured his initial refusal, Maya continued. His insults, his threats, his justification for lying in his report, and the moment he hit me. Keller clutched his head, shaking, mouthing silent. No, no, no. She turned to Doyle. And it captured every word you've said since you arrived. The sergeant stared at the device as though it were a lit fuse. Because in many ways it was. A tiny explosive truth that was about to blow open years of hidden misconduct. You tried to intimidate a federal agent, she said, her tone surgical. You tried to persuade me to disregard a crime, and you attempted to conceal evidence of wrongdoing. Doyle swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing once, twice. You can't, he began, but his words were drowned out by the sound of his own voice. Maya tapped her FBI-issued phone, and suddenly Freedom Square filled with a playback so crisp, so damning, so irrefutable, that every bystander who had been pretending not to look now turned fully toward the sound. Keller's voice, "Nobody tells me what to do, especially not some mouthy broad." The sickening thud of the punch, Maya's sharp intake of breath. Keller again, proud and mocking. "How's that for smart?" Bystanders gasped. One woman put a hand over her mouth. A man stepped backward, whispering, "Oh my God." Then Keller's own panicked voice calling Doyle. "She's claiming she's FBI. I might have made a mistake." Then Doyle's smooth conspiratorial tone. "No need to make this a federal case." Silence followed. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was outrage. It was recognition. It was the collective inhale of people realizing they had witnessed a system laid bare. Keller broke first. He collapsed against the lamppost, sliding downward, hands in his hair, sobbing. Not for what he'd done, but for what he could no longer escape. Doyle didn't cry. He stood stone still, jaw clenched, eyes burning with the realization that everything he had spent years covering up had finally come for him. Not through politics, not through protests, through one woman refusing to bow. Maya switched off the audio. The silence that followed felt sacred. She reattached the camera to its magnetic clasp, turned to the two officers, and with a steady voice declared, "Officer Keller, you are under arrest for assaulting a federal officer. Sergeant Doyle, you are being detained on suspicion of obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Place your hands behind your back." The square seemed to exhale. For once, justice did not feel abstract. It felt real, present, breathing. Maya reached for her handcuffs, not in triumph, but in duty, in dignity, in the quiet, unwavering belief that America becomes stronger each time someone stands against injustice. When the FBI sedans arrived minutes later, agents moved with swift, calm professionalism, securing Keller and Doyle as the crowd watched. Not in fear, but in something closer to awe. Because they had seen what happens when truth is recorded, when courage refuses to bend, when a black woman stands tall in the face of a system designed to silence her. And they saw something even more powerful. The wall didn't crack. It didn't bend. It broke. The tape that heard everything. For several long seconds after Special Agent Maya Johnson finished speaking, after she announced the charges, after she exposed the lies, after she shattered the wall that had shielded Keller and Doyle, there was a silence in Freedom Square that felt almost holy, not empty, not afraid, but charged. A silence born from truth finally stepping into the light. Officer Brad Keller was no longer pacing or posturing. He was sitting, collapsed really, against the lamppost like a child who'd wandered too far from home and discovered the world wasn't nearly as safe as he'd been taught to believe. His chest heaved. His eyes darted everywhere except at Maya. Sergeant Frank Doyle, meanwhile, remained standing, rigid, jaw clenched, face draining of color. His posture screamed authority, but his eyes betrayed something else entirely. The dawning, undeniable knowledge that his career, his reputation, and his years of political maneuvering were dissolving into dust before his eyes. He wasn't broken yet, but he was cracked, and cracks widen. Maya stood between them like a pillar, bruised but unbowed, bleeding but composed. The weight of the moment pressed on her swollen cheek, but it did not bend her. The Kestrel 7 camera lay still against her chest, its lens a tiny, unblinking witness to a history Keller and Doyle could no longer rewrite. A few bystanders whispered. Someone quietly recorded now, emboldened. The truth had changed the air. It had granted permission for people to look, to witness, to understand the gravity of what had been hidden for so long. Then almost tenderly, almost ceremonially, Maya lifted her FBI phone again, this time with purpose. "We're not finished," she said quietly. Keller whimpered. Doyle's breath caught. Maya tapped the screen, and suddenly the square filled with voices that no one could deny. The audio plays again. It began with Keller's derision, some kind of Karen out for her daily complaint. His tone had been sharp, mocking, dismissive, meant to belittle, not to communicate. Then Maya's calm voice, measured and respectful, reminding him of safety, of responsibility. Then Keller again. "Nobody tells me what to do, especially not some mouthy broad who thinks she knows better." His contempt cut through the air like a blade. The recording captured the wet, sickening thud of his fist striking her face. It was a sound that made bystanders flinch even now, even knowing the outcome. Pain became audible. The brutality is undeniable. Then his cruel, triumphant voice. "How's that for smart?" The words echoed across Freedom Square, bouncing off shop windows, sinking into the brick ground, landing heavily in the hearts of everyone listening. Then came the panicked whisper of Keller calling Doyle. "Miller, it's Keller. I might have made a mistake. She's claiming she's FBI." And finally Doyle's own voice, the voice of a seasoned officer who thought himself untouchable. "No need to make this a federal case." The moment that line played, something in Doyle visibly buckled. His shoulders sagged, his eyes glazed with the weight of his own betrayal, not of Keller, but of the uniform he claimed to respect. Maya pressed pause, and the silence that followed was devastating. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of clarity. Everyone now knew the truth. Everyone had heard the system in action, its violence, its cover-ups, its rot. Everyone had witnessed the moment when arrogance met accountability and lost. Keller sobbed openly now, his hands shaking against his forehead. "Oh my God! Oh God! Sergeant Doyle, what do we do?" His voice cracked on the last word, revealing not a confident officer, but a scared, lost man. Someone who had relied on protected power so long, he didn't know how to exist without it. Doyle didn't answer. For the first time, perhaps in years, the man who had cleaned up countless internal messes had no script, no strategy, no lifeline. He stared at Maya with an expression that surprised even him. Respect. It was small, it was grudging, but it was real. He had underestimated her discipline, her courage, her refusal to bend. He had mistaken silence for submission, calm for weakness, dignity for fragility. Now he saw her clearly. "You," Doyle murmured, almost dazed. "You knew. You came in prepared." Maya didn't gloat. She didn't taunt him. She simply nodded once. "Justice requires preparation," she said softly. Her voice wasn't accusatory. It wasn't cruel. It carried the weight of a lesson, one she hoped would echo beyond this moment. A reminder that accountability isn't revenge. It's responsibility. Doyle's eyes dropped to the ground, shame blooming across his features. Keller continued to unravel. I'm sorry. I didn't mean," he sputtered, but the apology was hollow. Not because it lacked tears, but because it lacked truth. He was not sorry for hurting her. He was sorry he got caught. Maya knew the difference. America knew the difference. And the Kestrel 7 recorder had no capacity for lies. The FBI arrives, 2 black sedans glided into the square, unmarked but unmistakable. Their arrival carried a different kind of authority. Quiet, surgical, uncompromising. The agents stepped out with calm professionalism, their movements smooth and disciplined. They didn't bark orders. They didn't posture. They simply approached. Special Agent Ruiz came to Maya first. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I'm fine." He didn't need more. Her posture said everything. Then the agents turned to Keller and Doyle. Keller shook his head violently. Wait, no, please let me explain. But the explanation was no longer his to control. The evidence was no longer his to twist. The narrative was no longer his to own. Doyle didn't fight. He extended his hands behind his back with a resigned exhale, the weight of years pressing heavily on his spine. For the first time, he followed the rules he had sworn to uphold. As the agents secured the handcuffs, Maya felt no celebration inside her. Not the sweet thrill of victory, not the satisfaction of revenge. Only a quiet, sober release. She had not wanted to hurt these men. She had wanted to hold them accountable, not just for herself, but for every person who had been silenced by officers like them. This wasn't vengeance. This was justice. And justice was never supposed to feel good. It was supposed to feel right. The blue wall collapses. The arrests themselves took minutes. The meeting took generations. People watched. Some recorded, some cried, some stood still, the truth reshaping their understanding of the world. A woman whispered, "She's so strong." A man muttered, "About damn time." A teenager watching said, This, this is how it's supposed to work." But the deeper truth was this. The blue wall of silence had protected Keller and Doyle for years. Yet today it became the very evidence that condemned them. The system had been exposed not by force, but by discipline, not by retaliation, but by truth, not by shouting, but by bearing witness. Maya did not smile. She did not flinch. She simply breathed, because this victory was not hers alone. It belonged to every family that had filed complaints that went nowhere, every person whose voice had been dismissed, every black woman who had been told her pain was misunderstood, exaggerated, or unbelievable. Today, the truth believed her. Today, the truth set a precedent. Today, in the sweltering heat of Freedom Square, America saw a glimpse of the accountability it had long been promised, but rarely delivered. A quiet moral rising. As the sedans drove away, Maya stood alone again. But not the same kind of alone she'd felt earlier. This was different. This was the quiet solitude that follows courage, the heaviness that comes with knowing you have changed something, even if only in one small corner of the world. She touched the cracked sunglasses at her side, feeling the broken lens under her fingertips. It was a reminder of the violence she had endured, but also of the resilience she embodied. Pain leaves scars, but scars can become lessons. Lessons can become courage, and courage, when witnessed, can become change. Maya lifted her head toward the setting sun. She didn't celebrate. She didn't sigh in relief. She simply whispered, almost to herself, one truth at a time. Because that is how justice is built. That is how racism is dismantled. That is how America grows stronger. Not all at once, but moment by moment. Truth by truth, courage by courage. And today, courage won. A stronger America. The days following the arrests in Freedom Square unfolded like a storm rolling across the nation. Slow at first, then sudden, violent, impossible to ignore. It began with whispers, a leaked video, a federal investigation, 2 officers detained. Then the whispers became headlines. Then the headlines ignited outrage. By the end of the week, America knew the name Special Agent Maya Johnson. Not because she sought attention, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because the truth she carried, punched into her skin, caught on her camera, spoken with her calm, unwavering voice, was no longer something the country could turn away from. The footage, once secured by the FBI, made its way from the evidence folder to the public sphere through an anonymous leak. The world saw exactly what happened: the arrogance, the threats, the violence, the cover-up attempt, the crack in the blue wall, the collapse of a system failing under its own corruption. Viewers watched the punch and felt it. They watched Keller's sneer and tasted the bile of injustice. They watched Doyle's calculated manipulation and recognized a deeper rot. And they watched Maya stand tall, bloodied, bruised, steady, and felt something ancient and powerful rise inside them. A blend of sorrow and righteous hope, a longing for a better nation, a belief that courage can crack open a darkness long left untouched. The courtroom. Truth as evidence. The courtroom was colder than Maya expected. Sleek marble floors, Polished oak benches, the ever-present hum of fluorescent lights. A place meant to feel neutral, but too often tilted by human bias. She sat at the prosecution's table, her posture composed, her hair pulled back, her face still faintly marked by the healed bruise and the faint silver line on her lip. A scar that would remain, a reminder she chose not to hide. Across the room, Brad Keller sat flanked by his attorney. The former officer looked smaller than he had in Freedom Square, shrunken by consequence, stripped of the authority that once emboldened him. Without the badge, without the swagger, without the system shielding him, he was simply a man, one whose cruelty had become undeniable. His lawyer, a tall man with a crisp suit and a desperate strategy, attempted to frame Keller as an overstressed officer, a man pushed past his limits by long hours and emotional fatigue. He reacted poorly, the attorney argued. He made a mistake, but he is not a monster. The jury's faces remained impassive, but their discomfort was palpable, because the video showed his intent, the tape revealed his malice, and the truth did not bend for convenience. When the prosecutor asked to play the recording, Keller's attorney objected, but the judge overruled without hesitation. The speakers crackled to life. Keller's insults echoed around the courtroom. His threats filled the space like poison. The punch landed again, an ugly, visceral sound that made even the judge flinch. Then came Keller's mocking laughter. "How's that for smart?" Silence filled the courtroom after the audio finished. A deep, heavy silence that wrapped itself around everyone present. A silence that forced no one to imagine the truth, because the truth was right there, unfiltered, unforgivable. Then Maya took the stand. The prosecutor approached her gently. "Agent Johnson, would you please describe the events of that day?" Maya didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She didn't even sound angry. She simply told the truth. "My entire career," she said, her voice steady but resonant, "has been spent confronting people who believe their power allows them to harm others. Whether they carry weapons, wear uniforms, or hold titles, the principle is the same." The courtroom leaned in. "You do not walk away," she continued. "You do not stay silent. You hold them accountable. Because if not you, then who? If not now, then when?" Her words didn't just explain her actions. They illuminated them. They offered a blueprint for a stronger country, one built not on fear, but on integrity. The defense attorney attempted to undermine her. "Agent Johnson," he said with feigned sympathy, "wouldn't you agree you could have avoided this by simply walking away?" Maya turned her gaze, not to him, but to the jury, to the public, to the invisible generations who had survived by swallowing their truth. "If I walked away," she said quietly, "I would be walking away from every person who never had the chance to speak up, from every voice quieted by intimidation, from every injustice justified by a uniform." Her voice did not rise, it did not crack, it simply shone. "But more than that," she said, "I would be walking away from the America I believe in." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, soft but full of emotion. People felt those words not as rhetoric, but as something sacred. The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned, the courtroom felt frozen, breath held in collective suspense. Keller's eyes darted desperately from face to face, searching for mercy, finding none. "On the charge of assaulting a federal officer," the forewoman said, "we find the defendant guilty." Keller sagged in his seat, hands trembling. "On the charge of perjury, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty." The final count echoed like a hammer strike. He faced 5 years and 6 months in federal prison. No parole. The judge's words were devastating in their condemnation. "You were entrusted to protect your community," he said. "Instead, you abused your authority, inflicted violence, and then attempted to weaponize the system meant to restrain you. You are a disgrace to the uniform you once wore." Keller didn't look up. He couldn't. The fall of Sergeant Doyle Frank Doyle, in an effort to lessen his own punishment, accepted a plea bargain. But that didn't save him. It simply clarified the depth of the rot within the department. He testified against Keller. But in testifying, he confessed decades of buried misconduct, excessive force complaints handled internally, investigations redirected, officers counseled rather than disciplined. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in a minimum security facility. Doyle didn't fight it. He didn't argue. The moment Maya revealed her badge back in the square, he knew his time of protection was over. For him, the greatest punishment wasn't prison. It was truth he could no longer outrun. The truth that finally found him. The aftermath as Keller was led away in cuffs, Maya watched with an expression that was neither triumphant nor vindictive. She felt quiet, steady, resolved. Justice to her wasn't a victory. It was the closing of a wound. When the civil judgment awarded her $500,000, she didn't hesitate. She donated every dollar to a foundation supporting victims of police brutality. Because justice isn't complete if it begins and ends with one person. It must ripple outward. It must uplift. It must heal. Leaving the courthouse. When Maya stepped into the sun after the final hearing, it spread across her face, warm and reassuring. She touched the silver line of her scar. No longer painful, no longer frightening. It felt like a reminder, a quiet promise, a map of a battle she hadn't planned for, but refused to lose. She looked up at the sky and inhaled deeply. Freedom Square had changed her life, but it had also changed something bigger, something woven into the fabric of America. Because the wheels of justice turn slowly. But when they move, when truth forces their hand, they grind forward with unstoppable force. Her story had become more than an incident. It had become a reckoning, a mirror, a call to consciousness. And America had listened. The moral rising Maya didn't pretend that the fight was over. For every Keller exposed, a dozen more operated in shadows. For every Doyle who fell, another system waited to replace him. For every truth recorded, countless others remained unseen. And yet, there was hope. Because truth, once shown, cannot be unseen. Because courage, once witnessed, cannot be forgotten. Because justice, no matter how small the start, ripples outward. Maya believed in an America capable of transformation. Not through rage alone, not through division, but through responsibility, unity, and humanity. She believed in an America where racism was confronted boldly and compassionately, where communities didn't just coexist, they protected one another, where kindness was a power, not a weakness, where justice was not the privilege of the few, but the right of all. Her grandmother's words echoed in her heart. Baby, we build this country stronger every time we choose love over fear. And standing there beneath the afternoon sun, Maya felt that truth like a heartbeat. The final message, humanistic, emotional, transformative. This story isn't just about a violent punch. It isn't just about a corrupt officer. It isn't just about a brave FBI agent. It is about America, about who we are, about who we want to be. It calls us to reject racism in every form, not only in fists but in words. Not only in actions, but in silence. Not only in systems, but in ourselves. It calls us to embrace kindness, not as a passive gesture, but as a courageous stance. Kindness that protects. Kindness that listens. Kindness that demands justice. It calls us to help one another because no one heals alone. No one faces injustice alone, and no one should ever have to. And it calls us to build a stronger America, an America rooted in fairness, in compassion, in love. A country where truth is not feared, where accountability is not optional, where every human life holds equal worth. If Maya's story teaches us anything, it is this. Courage isn't loud, justice isn't quick, but love, the fierce, brave, human kind, has the power to reshape the world. One truth, one nation, one people. At the end of Maya Johnson's story, we are left with more than justice served. We are left with a message, one carried not in anger, but in humanity. Her courage reminds us that this country becomes stronger every time ordinary people stand up for what is right. It reminds us that silence protects no one, that truth is a force of its own, and that love, Real love, the kind that demands fairness and dignity, is one of the greatest powers we have. Her scar is not just a mark of violence. It is a symbol of resilience, of hope, of a nation still learning, still growing, still capable of transformation. This story calls on all of us to reject racism wherever it appears. In our institutions, in our communities, and even in the quiet corners of our own fears. It asks us to treat one another with compassion, to speak up when we see harm, and to use our voices to lift others rather than tear them down. Because when we help one another, when we protect one another, when we choose kindness over cruelty and truth over silence, we build a stronger America, a more loving America, a more united America. If this story moved you, inspired you, or opened your heart, then join us. Be part of a community that believes in justice, equality, and the power of storytelling to change lives. Subscribe to the Racial Truth YouTube channel. Your voice, your presence, and your support help these stories reach the world. Visit our channel to watch more videos. Each one is crafted to open minds, heal hearts, and shine a light on the truth. Because truth is how we grow, how we heal, and how we become better together. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for choosing love. Together we rise. Together we build. Together we create the America we all deserve.